Welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. I am Mark Regev, and I'm here with my co-host, the audacious Ruthie Blum.
Hi, Mark. You know, this week of all weeks, we have a lot to talk about. And I'll start by saying we're back. Israel is back in the saddle after a year of, I would say, low morale. We've got our mojo back.
And we are speaking the morning after Israel's ground incursion into Lebanon. And there's been talk over the last few days that Israel was going to do this. Israeli forces crossed. There were even reports, of course, that there'd been different Israeli little things going on with ground forces. But there was last night, Israel time, a movement of forces into South Lebanon. The Israeli military says this is targeted, this is limited. But if you think about it, South Lebanon is full, unfortunately, of Hezbollah infrastructure that they've built up over the last 20 years. There are bunkers, there are tunnels, there are missile launching facilities. And the idea that Israel has to go in and remove these threats to the Israeli public is very logical.
No, absolutely. And I have to say, I'm a little sick and tired of these words, targeted and limited. And, you know, I can't help feeling that that's just to appease the White House, the State Department, and Israelis who say, Lebanon, and don't stay in too long, and we can't go in too long, and we can't turn into another Gaza. Well, we may have to. We don't know yet, but one thing is for sure. We have to stop apologizing for using aggression when we need to. It is all self-defense. And for a whole year, we've been saying, no, we're defending ourselves and it's precise. We know we're in the right here. We were assaulted by Hamas on October 7th and October 8th. Hezbollah joined in, and then the Houthis from Yemen. And I think it's no accident that Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday addressed the Iranian people directly. And he basically said to them, you know that you cannot tolerate your own regime that is subjugating you. And we're your allies. And Israel and Israelis and Persians can return to or can have peace and have really great relations. And he said something along the lines of it's going to happen sooner than you think. And I am hoping that that means that in addition to all the assassinations we've been carrying out beautifully, that our next targets are the Ayatollahs in Tehran.
So we'll go back to Lebanon, but if you raise the Iranian issue, I thought what the Prime Minister said was very, first of all, it was true, and it's important to say it because people can forget. There's really no reason for any conflict between Israel and Iran, none whatsoever. There's no border dispute. There's no obvious reason why the two countries couldn't be allies and friends. And the truth is, before Ayatollah Khomeini threw out the Shah of Iran, who obviously wasn't perfect, but we had, just as the United States and many other countries had good relations with him. And I even remember flying to Israel, because I grew up in Australia. When we flew to Israel, we'd come from the east, yes? When you fly from America, you go in the opposite direction. You enter Israel from the west. But from my part of the world where I grew up in, you came from the east. And I remember the plane would actually stop in Tehran. And from Tehran, you would change aircraft to an El Al aircraft and fly from El Al from Tehran to Tel Aviv. And it was a sign we had a good relationship with Iran then. And we could have a good relationship with Iran in the future. But it all depends on one thing. To paraphrase James Carville, it's all the regime stupid, because Iran was historically not hostile to Israel. It's this regime took over the country with its radical, extremist, anti-Semitic ideology. And it hijacked the country and has turned it into Israel's most ferocious and dangerous enemy. And one of the problems is the Iranian people are talented. The Iranian people are special. They know what they're on about, and they're very, as I said, very talented. And this regime has harnessed all the good that there is in Iran and has focused it on this terrible agenda. Now, the people of Iran hate their government. They'd like if there were democratic elections in Iran today, this regime would be tossed out in a second. And maybe that's not going to happen in the near future, unfortunately, because the regime will kill people to stay in power. Yes, it's a brutal authoritarian regime. But the people of Iran need to know that Israel's not their enemy, and we seek and we want a time when we can reinitiate the friendship that existed historically.
Well, the only way to do that, and again, this word regime change, I know a lot of people hate it because you say, look how that failed when America tried it here and there. Forget about, I don't even know if I want to say regime change. And I know that this is going to sound harsh, but I think that assassinations are the way to go. Regime change would suggest, no, we're going to get our guy in there and we're going to try to have these kind of elections, those kind of elections. Forget about it, okay? I think the Iranian people, left to their own devices, would make a good choice. In 1979, they certainly didn't. Those were radicals. And by the way, the Ayatollah Khomeini, when he returned from exile and the Shah was exiled out, he said, basically, I don't care about Iran. I care about the Islamic Ummah. And the whole idea here, and all the Iranian proxies trying to wipe us off the map, also would like to destroy the West. And here's the trouble. They've got a lot of fellow travelers in the international community. If you just look at the UN and you look at the UN Secretary General, it's appalling, because rather than celebrating our moves in Lebanon, including our assassination of Hassan Nasrallah and all those other bloodthirsty terrorists, he expressed dismay at this. And I would, ask him how he explains that Arabs and Iranians were celebrating all over the Middle East over that. All the ones who were tortured by these Shiite radicals, and specifically by Hezbollah. They were celebrating. They were handing out candy and cheering. And many Arabs were saying, go Israel and thank you, Israel. And we have Westerners at the UN saying that we did a bad thing. It's outrageous.
And we need to remind, maybe not our listeners to this program, they probably know, but Hezbollah is, of course, designated a terrorist organization across the world. The United States, Canada, Australia, Japan. It's not just Israel that sees these people as evil. In fact, it's been interesting because we not only took out Nasrallah, which of course was a great day for Israel, but we've been taking out all the senior leadership of the organization. It's almost that, we take out someone and someone is promoted to take their place and we take him out as well. It's always a him in Hezbollah. Women aren't in senior roles in the organization. But why do I say that? Because a lot of these people we've taken out actually have millions of dollars in reward money from the United States to take them out. Now, I don't think the Israeli pilots who do these operations are going to be asking for any money. But these are people who've killed Americans, they've killed French people, and they've killed others. In Argentina, people forget this, but back in the 1990s, Hezbollah was directly responsible for brutal...
the Amia bombing.
Yes.
And killed hundreds of Americans in the 1980s and 1983. But this is exactly my point. And this is why I get enraged, as you know, at the American administration. I repeatedly get enraged because there's this, on the one hand, we uphold Israel's right to defend itself, as though that's not a given for any entity has a right to defend itself. No, America should be saying, you have the duty to defend yourself and the West, and thank you for doing it, and we're going to help you do it. Not, hold off, don't kill too many people, do it, but do it in a limited way, and what's going to happen? This is another thing. What about the day after? And then the Israeli anti-Netanyahu crowd saying, there's no strategy. Well, that is insane. Of course, there's a strategy. We see over the last 2 weeks a real strategy. One of it was you take out the second tier, the third tier, all the Hezbollah terrorists. Then you go up, you work your way up the pyramid. It was brilliant. Okay, that's why, as you said, anytime there's a replacement, somebody said anyone who's going to fill Nasrallah's shoes won't have time to tie his laces. And that's a good thing. And I want the Ayatollahs, I want Khamenei and all his mullah thugs taken out in that way. And I don't know if we have the capability of doing it, but we do know one thing. We managed to assassinate Hamas chief Haniya when he was attending in Tehran, attending the funeral. Funeral. You see, I said that was a Freudian slip, the inauguration of the new president of Iran. And the fact that we could do that means that I think we could start taking out the Ayatollahs.
I'm not saying anything you said is wrong or right, but just let's record straight for all our viewers and listeners. Israel never took responsibility for the assassination of Haniya. Many people presume it's Israel. Maybe that's, conventional wisdom, so to speak. But we have to remind that Israel never actually said we did it. We did take claim for taking out Nasrallah and the Hezbollah leadership in Lebanon. That we're very proud to say. Israel has never publicly commented about the taking out of the Hamas leader in Tehran. Not that he didn't deserve to be taken out. Let's be clear about that. But you raised the issue of the United States, and I want to say what needs to be said. And I have been critical of the administration when I thought it need be. But there was a report out of the Pentagon that just with the Israeli incursion into Lebanon last night, there was a phone conversation between Defense Secretary Austin and our Defense Minister Gallant. And the Americans, I understand, are being supportive of our goal. They understand the need to create a situation where we'll allow the civilians in northern Israel to return to their homes. That obviously can't happen as long as Hezbollah has all this infrastructure and forces on the border. But can I just say a point here?
Yeah.
When the Americans say to us, you've got to be careful, and you've got to be, there was that word from the Vietnam era, mission creep. That, sometimes you start something and you don't know where it's going to go. I think, as an Israeli, as someone who served in Lebanon following the 1982 Lebanon War, as someone who saw how things went in 2006 in what the Israelis call the Second Lebanon War, yes, I think we have to be very, very calibrated in what we do. I think we have to be very, very, very thoughtful in what we do. Using military force always contains great possibilities to do important things that you need to do, but there are always great dangers. And so far, what Israel has been, how we've been playing this game, this conflict, I think we've been doing it very, very well. But there's always a chance, and we know this from, all of human history, you have one success, you have another success, you have a third success, and then suddenly you overreach. And we have to be very, I think, focused on not making a mistake. We have to win this. We have to defeat Hezbollah, but we have to do it in a way that we don't overreach and somehow play into their hands or with the hands of their allies.
Oh, overreach. Look, do me a favor. First of all, I think that's all well and good that Austin and Gallant had a nice phone conversation. But how generous of Austin to say, we support you in this. I'm trying to point out to you that we're doing their job. It's very well and good, but again, it's all defensive. They're taking a defensive posture.
No, they're supporting us as we're being offensive.
But again, they're there not to help us in any kind of offensive measure. And Austin is the defense secretary. So he's saying, okay, we support what you're doing. The White House and State Department are saying, okay, finish up fast. Let's get a diplomatic solution, a ceasefire. Biden says, ceasefire. And let me tell you something. When you say we can't overreach, we have spent a year being cautious. We have spent a year, the mistakes we made in Gaza, since October 7th, not before, where we can go into that a whole, we have plenty of time to talk about the horrors that led up to October 7th. But since October 7th, all we did was say to Biden, thank you, and, thank you for helping us in weapons. And then agreeing not to go into Rafah when we needed to, or just being too cautious. And let me also say, yes, that is true. You don't know when you start a war how it's going to end. We have spent a year being attacked by Hezbollah. We now are fighting back. We are not, and a ground incursion is necessary, and we need to push them back, etc. But I'm sorry to say that we need a third Lebanon war. And you know what? The way we hightailed it out of Lebanon in 2000, and then in 2006, again, we had a big war, and then again, it ended with diplomacy that never was implemented. It's baloney. What you need is to defeat your enemy and then dictate the terms of a ceasefire afterwards. We never dictate our terms. It's about time we learned a lesson from that, okay? We always say, generals fight the last war, not the next war. Okay, because you can't always anticipate. But one thing we did learn, and we certainly learned it on October 7th, we even learned it in the war in 2006 in Lebanon. The Air Force and technology are not enough. You need tanks, you need troops on the ground, you need training. The era of war with troops on the ground is not over, and we did learn that. And politically, the thing we have to learn is to stop letting the enemy and, by the way, the UN dictate any of our terms.
So I'll respond to that by saying the following. It's clear that there are targets all across South Lebanon that we have to destroy. I said before, there are the Hezbollah bunkers, there are tunnels. I myself have seen the tunnels. They built these attack tunnels to go from Lebanon into Israel. They wanted to do the sort of attacks that Hezbollah did back in October. Yes, they were planning. In fact, in many ways, maybe Hamas was learning from the Hezbollah model because they cooperated so closely, they trained together and so forth. And so it's crucial that we go into South Lebanon and clean out this Hezbollah infrastructure. All I'm saying to you is that we have to be judicious. And it's always very careful to think, in a war, you've always got to say what's going to go wrong and when it's going to go wrong. When is it going to go wrong? I mean, there were previous rounds that we both remember where there was an Israeli shell that went astray and innocent people were killed. There's a famous place, Kana in South Lebanon, where it happened twice that we had accidents there in the same place. And then there's the, international outcry and the UN Security Council and all sorts of problems. We have to win this war, but we have to be judicious. And I also want to say something here. Sending in ground forces, and you know this, you've got a son in the military. My daughter was just called up also for her reserve duty. There's a price that needs to be paid. Yes, we can't be illusions that we can get victory that we need on the cheap. And we will lose many of our, I hope not many, but we'll lose soldiers. And I noticed the Prime Minister's words. He said the Israelis have to be ready for difficult days. And we have to do the job. But I'm just saying, right, not to shoot from the hip, be judicious. We have been. Look, according to international reports, let's look at what's happened. According to international reports, we did the beeper attacks and then the walkie-talkie attacks. And then we had a series of Air Force actions against senior Hezbollah leadership, which included taking out Nasrallah. Since then, we've taken out more senior Hezbollah leadership. We've been hitting other targets in Lebanon. Apparently, we've neutralized a lot of their ability to shoot rockets into Israel. We've been going fine. Yeah. All I'm saying is we've got to keep our eye on the ball. We don't want success to bring Israeli hubris. That's what led to October 7th in many ways, maybe. And we've got to understand that when we're dealing with Lebanon, and we've got to remember, I talked about overreach before. In 1982, Israel did overreach. We've got to be very, very, very clear what our goals are. The goal is push Hezbollah back, hurt Hezbollah hard, destroy a lot of their military structure, not allow them to return to the south. And you said very correctly, we cannot rely on the UN or anyone else to prevent Hezbollah from returning to the south. It's incumbent upon us when this is over to enforce the new security arrangements and have no tolerance whatsoever. If Hezbollah does something that's not in our interest, we have to act, and we have to act immediately.
But we have to actually do it. Okay, and when you're talking about, these mishaps, because we never, ever target civilians, and I don't care what our enemies say. It's not true. We never target civilians, unlike our enemies who target their own civilians and our civilians. That's their strategy. Okay, we never do. But when there's a mishap, I am sick and tired. Again, I'm sick and tired of what happened since October 7th, that the whole world, you said we have to be careful because when if there's a mishap and we kill civilians, often, by the way, it turns out that actually it was the enemy's mishap that killed those civilians. But even when we do it, we didn't aim to do it. We apologize for doing it. And then we're worried about what vile people like the UN chief Guterres has to say about us and has to believe the Hamas health ministry and all that. I'm sorry, in the battle between good and evil, I know you don't like those terms, but I'm going to use them. In the battle between, civilized people and non-civilized people, however you want to say it, it is outrageous that the UN, the West, should be on Israel's side, should believe Israel when it says it doesn't target civilians, should know that by now. No, it's always an opportunity to attack us. And because of that, we have legitimacy and we have to stop worrying what they say about us. We've got to stop that because it hinders our ability to be aggressive when we need to be. Now, that's also what's good about the Jews, right? We don't like to be aggressive. We don't like wars. We never have. We try not to. But I'm sorry for us to be sitting ducks and say, oh, okay, if 1,200 people are slaughtered and women are raped and 250 people are abducted into Gaza, then we have legitimacy. No more. I do not want to wait for my children and your children, whether they're in uniform or not in uniform, to have to suffer those kind of tragedies in order for us to have legitimacy to do what's necessary, to kill as many people as necessary in order to protect ourselves.
So we don't have a disagreement on the UN. I actually teach a course at Regev University on Israel and the UN. And the truth is, the UN has a strong institutional anti-Israel bias. And it's not just Israelis who say that. There were two former Secretary Generals of the United Nations who have publicly talked about it, addressed this as a problem that the UN has. And we've seen it in the problem in the fighting in Gaza, right? The behavior of the Secretary General and everyone down, yes, has been almost from not acknowledging the sexual violence against Israeli women to the condemnations of Israel, to the fact that the UN bodies in Gaza in many ways have been infected and taken over by Hamas. I mean, UNRWA is disgusting in the way it behaves. Yeah. Yes, and if we look at Lebanon, UNIFIL, the UN force that's supposed to give them, what has it done? Right? Has it in any way helped Israel protect itself? Has it kept? The UN says there's a UN resolution 1701, yes, that says Hezbollah should not have armed forces south of the Litani River, and has that right? It's a joke.
Not from day one, never.
So it's clear to me when this is over and Israel ceases our offensive operation, and there are understandings reached, and America, maybe France also are behind the scenes trying to reach those understandings. But in the end, there will have to be understandings. When those understandings are reached and peace returns, we in Israel have to remember one thing. In the past, we thought, if we respond to some violation, it'll break up the peace and it's a price, let's keep the peace. It's more important to keep the peace and quiet, so to speak. I think we have to learn from October 7th that if there are violations, we need to respond immediately, punish violations immediately. And that is easy to say today when we're in the middle of the fighting. It's more difficult to do when you've had a period of a couple of months of quiet and you say, well, the people in the north have just gotten loosed, returning to their homes and rebuilding, and we're going to endanger all that. It's difficult for a politician to make that decision, a small violation, and then you don't respond. But if you don't respond, there'll be another violation and another violation, and it's incumbent upon Israeli leadership to stand up and say, we don't accept any violations.
Right, but that's why I don't like this word understandings. We're going to reach understandings, and then when we have peace, first of all, we never have peace with those animals. I'm sorry, we don't have peace with Hezbollah, with any terrorists. There is no such thing as peace. Now, what we need to do is, it would be great if we could just wipe them all out, which we can't really do. With Hamas, it's slightly different. We can't really wipe them all out. But my point is, again, not understandings and not peace and not UN diplomacy, and not what we need is a victory. We need for them to be afraid of us, to retreat, acknowledge defeat, and let us dictate the terms. And as you said, if they violate it, we blitz. However, our other problem is that within our own cabinet, as usual, because we're a democracy and all that, naturally, not everybody agrees on the fact that we need to be the people guarding that whatever buffer zone we create. Of course, I think we have to. I don't see any other. You mentioned France. Are you joking?
Oh, no, I did not say.
No. But I mean.
I never even said, implied that France would protect Israel. I said they were trying together with the Americans to negotiate a new reality.
They were trying with the Americans to get us to capitulate to the terrorists, have a ceasefire without even getting all of our hostages in return. I'm sorry. That is like the biggest joke.
No, I was talking about Lebanon. I wasn't talking about Gaza.
But right. France is France. France, the word ceasefire, when we haven't even begun to fire, as I always say, we cease, they fire. That's what Macron has in mind. And Biden, I don't know what he has in mind because he's been very confused about everything that's going on. I'm sorry, that is not acceptable. And I have to say, Western Europe, finished. Eastern Europe is on our side. Okay. But you say any violation, it's before we get to the violations.
We've got to create a new reality.
We have to create a reality that they know we're the boss. We're the boss. We're not their buddy.
I don't think we want to be anyone's boss. I think what we want to do is we want to reestablish the fact that Israel is strong, that Israel has capabilities, that if you send someone, and I'm not saying anything new here, the Prime Minister has said this repeatedly, if you attack us, you will pay a price. We saw that in Israel's response a day or two ago when we responded to the Houthis' missile attacks on Israel. You saw that in what we're doing against Hezbollah. There are all these reported Israeli, we don't take credit for the ones in Syria, but there are the reported supposedly Israelis acting in Syria too. And the message is clear. And this is reestablishing the fact that Israel is strong and can defend itself, and our enemies, if they attack us, will pay a price that it's not in their interest to start with Israel. I'll tell you something else, Ruthie. This is not only good for Israeli security that we're seeing as being strong and powerful, and you're making a grave mistake if you start a war or attack Israel, yes? But it's not only good for Israeli security, it's good for peace. Because the Arabs across the Gulf, they don't want to make peace with a weak ally. No one needs a weak ally. People only make peace agreements with strong allies. And when you said before, and across the Gulf, when we took out Nasrallah, it wasn't just the Israelis who were smiling. Across the Gulf, people were smiling. The Arab League, I never have very many good things to say about the Arab League, but I'll pay them one compliment. In the middle of the Syrian civil war, when Hezbollah was the ally of Assad and was in this murderous operation against the Syrian people, right? The Arab League actually declared Hezbollah a terrorist organization. So these people have very few friends across the Arab world. And when Israel is tough with Hezbollah, once again, we're not only protecting ourselves, enhancing deterrence and sending a message, you attack us, you will pay our price, yes? But it's also, I think, making Israel a more desirable partner in peace for those Arabs who have a different path forward.
By the way, you're absolutely right, but I would sort of describe it differently. When Netanyahu went to address the joint session of Congress in 2015 to warn against the signing of the nuclear deal that Obama was so hot to sign, of course, he then did sign it. That speech was a great speech. It didn't work, but I'll tell you what it did do. After that speech, the Gulf states were so shocked they went up to Netanyahu and his and to Ron Dermer at the time, who was then the U.S. ambassador, Israel's ambassador in the U.S., and they said, "Wow, he stood up to the president of the United States about Iran." Now, that was the precursor. That tough speech against Iran was the precursor directly to the Abraham Accords that were signed 5 years later. But that was the direct line from that speech to the Abraham Accords. And why is that important? Because after October 7th, what you started to see from the Abraham Accords countries and Saudi Arabia, that was already on the verge of getting some kind of agreement with Israel. I don't know how peaceful, but whatever, joining in. They saw us be weak, attacked, and saw what was happening in Washington with an administration that joined the Iran deal. And then they said, uh-oh, this isn't the strong horse. And that's when they all began to say, oh, we need a Palestinian state and don't kill any Palestinians and don't. And just this week it was, you had Saudi Crown Prince acknowledge that he doesn't really care at all about the Palestinians.
Yes, I missed that, but I presume that
he acknowledged it. He gave an interview. He acknowledged it, not in Israel. He acknowledged he doesn't really care about the Palestinians, but he knows that the Saudi people, a lot of Saudi people do, and that's why he has made it, Palestinian statehood. But we knew that they didn't care. How did we know? Because they agreed to sign those accords and said, if the Palestinians want to join the Abraham Accords, come on in. But they didn't. Because
the big change with the Abraham Accords, and it's still there, and is that though I think Arab public opinion is sympathetic towards the Palestinians, they've made a strategic decision. They won't give the Palestinians a veto over their own national interest, over their own foreign policy. In the past, the Palestinians had a veto. Now countries, the Abraham Accords countries, and if it expands, understand, and they will expand. I expect the expansion of peace. But they understand that these countries, like any normal country, will pursue their national interests and won't give these dysfunctional Palestinians with a leadership that is just being irresponsible. Yes, part of the leadership is Hamas, and they just want to kill all the Jews, and another part of the leadership refuses to condemn October 7th, yes, and is probably quite open to October 7th. That's the sad truth. And so that's the great thing that's happened. The Arab countries are now pursuing national interests and have removed this Palestinian veto from their behavior. But look, we're coming to the end of our broadcast, and it's October, and we're about to have Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah. And that's why we're recording our broadcast a day early, because we've got to let everyone have the day off before the holiday starts. And I wanted to tell you that I'm optimistic about this new year. At the most basic level, I mean, we've been through a tough year this past year, and so the coming year has to be better. But that's very minimalistic. If you see what Israel has been doing the last couple of days, right? The success we've had in our operations against one of our most ferocious enemies, Hezbollah, yes? We're seeing Israel on the ball. We're seeing Israel being Israel being proactive. We're seeing Israel having success after success. I said before, we shouldn't let success go to our heads, but it's nice when we're succeeding, much nicer than when we're losing.
Oh, our morale has been lifted so incredibly across the board, and that is so crucial for internal unity, as everyone talks about. I know we don't have unity, etc. But I have to say, when you're winning, it feels good. And that sort of takes over, it drowns out protests and anger. It does. And we are winning. That is, Netanyahu said that, by the way, at the United Nations.
And I need to say that if the coming year looks a bit like this last week and a half, so we in Israel, the Jewish people, the Jewish state, this coming year will really be a Shana Tova.
Absolutely.